My next guest on the Nourish Soul podcast is Dr. Stacey Shelby. So, Dr. Shelby is an author, she's an educator, and she is also a depth psychotherapist. So, depth psychology is often referred to as Jungian psychology. So, those kind of go hand in hand. Very interesting. Depth psychology is really interesting. Dr. Shelby is really interesting. And we had a really wonderful conversation. She is the author of two books. Love and Soul Making is one of her books. And then Tracking the Wild Woman Archetype is her other book. And of course, we talk about the soul. We talk about kind of all things soul related, really fun conversation there. And then we talk about the wild woman archetype. We also talk about being in transition or when we have these transformative things going on in our lives. It just so happened that Stacey was getting ready to move, big transition from Canada to California. She has made that move and is doing really well, last I heard. So that's exciting. And I was getting ready to be evacuated for a hurricane. So we were both kind of in the middle of a lot, but we were able to suspend all that and really get present with each other in that, have a really lovely conversation. So I hope that you enjoy this episode as much as I enjoyed talking with Dr. Stacey Shelby. So, Dr. Stacey Shelby, I'm so excited to talk to you.
Thanks, Dr. Kelli. I'm excited to talk to you as well. That's really nice. And Stacey is fine, please.
Yeah, yeah. I always Kelly's when somebody calls me Mrs. Ritter or Dr. Ritter. You're like, oh, Kelly's fine.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So you are on the West Coast out in California, and it's nice and bright behind you.
I'm actually still, you're catching me like in the transition days. I'm still in Canada.
Oh, are you?
Yeah, I'm on my way to California in a few days. So this
Ah,
is my
that's
best backdrop I could pull together without it looking too sparse.
oh God, that's exciting that you're making a transition.
Yeah,
So
big
we
transition.
might be talking about that a little bit.
I'm sure it'll come up. Yeah.
Yeah. So talk to me about depth psychology. And I'm super excited about the wild woman archetype because I learned about the wild woman archetype, I think I was 19 or 20 years old. And yeah, so it was a fine time to be learning about the wild woman archetype. Yeah. So
Yeah,
wherever you want to start.
that might be just a really great place to start. So I'm going to guess we're probably roughly the same age because that was about the age I was introduced to women who run with the wolves as well.
I took a class on women who run with the wolves.
Yes, that was Dr. Clarissa Pincola Estes.
Mhm.
And she is absolutely credited with bringing the wild woman archetype, what I would call out of shadow. Like it had really gone into the collective unconscious by that point.
Mm.
And so, she deeply influenced me and literally millions of women.
Mhm.
And I guess I was so enamored with the work and Jungian psychology, depth psychology, that, I did my master's and PhD in depth psychology, which I'll talk a bit more about. And then I wrote my doctoral dissertation on the
Mhm.
wild woman archetype and really what that meant. And at that point, I was well into my 40s, and it meant a whole lot more to me at a really visceral level than it did, when it
Mhm.
first came out as a bestseller back when I was still like in my late teens. So
Mhm.
um, so that's the introduction to the wild woman archetype. It really comes from Dr. Estes.
Mhm.
And she is a Jungian, an analyst as well. And so Jungian psychology or depth psychology, they fall under the same umbrella as depth psychology.
Right.
And what it really is psychology that is in service to the soul.
Mm.
And the soul and the unconscious would be almost interchangeable, but not quite.
Okay.
And the wild woman would be almost interchangeable, but not quite. Wild
Okay.
woman would be more embodied and like really connected to the physicality of the human woman animal.
Okay. So somebody might use soul, somebody might use unconscious, and somebody might use wild woman archetype to be describing the same thing, but it's not really all the same
Not
thing.
quite the
Not
same
quite.
thing, but very close. And
Very close.
the fourth word
Hmm.
that's often in there is psyche, from the word
Psyche.
psychology,
Hmm.
which was the Greek word for soul. So all of these things sort of speak to
Right.
soul, the feminine, the archetypal feminine, the yin, luna, all of these different kinds of words. And then how women specifically embody that archetypal feminine energy would be more when we get into the wild woman, right?
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I love it's bringing me all back to my roots too, like to some of the things that originally attracted me to psychology. And then I was just super interested in the soul. But I found through my studies we didn't talk about the soul much. We sort of left it in the, in the wind behind us and just got really focused on the mind and the body, not even much that the body, but definitely sort of left psyche, the term psyche as soul out.
Yeah.
Mm.
And that is the traditional psychology. I mean, traditional is absolutely not the right word, actually, but that is the psychology that's taught in mainstream patriarchal academia, right? When you
Mhm.
move to into analysis or Pacifica Graduate Institute, which is where I went, or other
Mhm.
schools like Antioch and CIIS, California Institute of Integral Studies, they're all much more oriented around, I guess I would call it a whole person, including soul, right?
Right. Which when you work with people, you know that it is a whole person, that it's included and that it's an important, not even part. It's just it's all in there. So,
Exactly.
yeah. So how do you talk about describe the soul, or yeah, let's just stick with soul.
Well, I think, gosh, I do like defining these terms, and yet there's never like a concrete definition of them. They
Right.
don't like to be concretized.
Right.
But I like words, so so I like thinking about them.
Yeah.
So I would differentiate soul from spirit,
Uh-huh.
although I would personally identify as a spiritual person that is non-denominational, let's say, or spiritual, but not religious. But I would actually say I'm religious. I just don't have a religion. Anyway, so spiritual, um, the Dalai Lama described it as having great heights,
Mhm.
clear sounds, peak experiences. We think of
Mhm.
white and purity, mountain tops, crisp air. Like those would be words that would describe the eternal aspect of um, maybe what inhabits the body.
Mhm.
Soul would be what I would describe as the part that we experience here as humans. So if we have our body and
Mhm.
it's animated with soul
So,
and spirit, those two things, where body and spirit intersect, I would call that soul, or soul making, right? Soul
mm,
expands and grows with human experiences, in particular, the human experience of strife and struggle and suffering, unrequited love, which was what my last book was about. All of the things we
mm,
do to grow and become more authentic because there's some sort of discomfort in us, right?
yeah. So let's unpack that a little bit. What is it about struggle and the strife, the challenges? I understand intellectually that's where we grow, but I do get a little tired on a spiritual level of like, can it just be ease and flow? Can that not be where the soul is expanding? And maybe it is. It just feels like the more expansive times have been in the more challenging times. Um, But
Yeah. Oh gosh, isn't that true? And
mhm,
in this past few years in the collective,
yeah,
um,
yeah.
I think everybody, as women, I certainly know women, um, gosh, we're tired of being resilient and we're tired of being strong. Like where's the ease, the joy, the flow, the pleasure, right? Like everybody's just tired, you know? And I think that is creating an apex of energy
Mhm,
that's going to open, and then there'll have to be change, right? Because we can't individually and collectively
mhm,
sustain this high pressure and tension. Something new is gestating in it, and it'll erupt and be born through that.
mhm,
Now we can look to myth as kind of maps for where we are in processes, particularly collectively and individually. And the tale of Eros and Psyche, Eros being the god of love and Psyche being soul, is the tale that speaks about the development of Psyche, of soul. And so the tale essentially sends her through four impossible tasks, which she gets through because she has to. That's the resiliency that we're all like so tired of right now. We don't want to be resilient and strong. We want to enjoy life. We're here. Let's enjoy it. Um, the end of that tale, after all the suffering that she goes through, after the suffering that soul endures
mhm,
as a mortal human, is she gives birth to a girl child, a baby girl. And the child's name, the girl's name, usually translates as either pleasure or harmony.
mm,
So there's promise at the end of the strife and struggle and suffering that soul does come to a place of new life that
mhm,
is more pleasurable, more harmonious, more
mhm,
balanced. She unites with Eros, the god of love, as his equal. It's blessed by Aphrodite, the goddess of love, and all of the other deities on Olympus. So
mhm.
there is a map for what's happening right now, and I find that really, really helpful. It's happening individually, but it's also really happening collectively. The temperature is so high, right?
Right, right. We can feel it. Well, I just got goosebumps at the end of this story, and then I got a little teary about the
Oh,
reuniting, and then so that feels it's resonating that that's
yeah,
where we are. I hope. Um, you can feel it. You can feel
yeah,
that people. You can feel something shifting. There's going to
yeah,
be something new. And I think where I've been seeing a lot of people with a lot of anxiety and fear, so just that fear, the places within them that are fear based are popping
yeah,
up, and it's been very challenging, I think, and for me too, to not get swallowed in the fear and to really embrace, in that story, the hope for the harmony and the pleasure in the new life.
yeah. And the
Just
union,
and the
yes.
union. Yeah, the union was really where I got chill bumps. So, yeah, to hang on to that, but I thought maybe we'd talk a little bit about the fear.
Yeah, and I think the fear and anxiety. So from my perspective as a depth psychotherapist, depth psychologist, we
Mhm.
would look at fear and anxiety, depression, addiction, all of those things as symptoms of the soul. The soul is
Okay.
telling us something, right?
Right, right. I call
So,
it the soul screaming, but yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yes, a pretty loud symptom, let's call it.
Sometimes it's yes.
Absolutely, absolutely,
Yeah.
right?
Uh-huh.
And so when we try to resist it and
Mhm.
fix it and make it go away and reject it,
Yeah.
all we effectively do is push it into shadow, into the unconscious.
Mhm.
And when anything is repressed into the unconscious, it can operate autonomously because we're ignoring it. It's under the rug, but it's still a gremlin under the rug, right? So
Right.
we have to bring consciousness to it. And so sometimes that means night after night sitting with the 3 a.m. anxiety in the pit of the stomach, which I'm very familiar with because I'm
It's
transitioning down to
moving. Yeah.
California. Yeah, and
Yep.
a bazillion logistical details and pitfalls and all these things. But when we can sit with that and be with the anxiety, the body is telling us something. The soul is telling us something. Body and soul are inextricable. The soul communicates through the body. So we have to pay attention to those affects that are happening. And so we ground into it and we be with it and we thank it for the lessons and the teachings and what it's telling us. So rather than push it away, we look at it. What's it asking of us? Is it asking of us to, examine this particular part of whatever is happening in our lives so that we don't miss an important detail that could be really profound and significant, right? And if we're not getting that quiet time during the day because we're busy for all the reasons our society is very busy, a lot of it is a way of hiding from life.
Yeah.
Then we'll wake up in the middle of the night with anxiety because there's something we have to look at. And until we can make that space, it'll make the space for itself to be heard, right? But being there with it, with gratitude, if we can, which I know is a big ask when we're like scared.
Sure.
But if we can recognize the fear is there to alert us to something that's potentially a pitfall, and then we can mitigate the risk, right? So we don't want to go forward in this, what I would call blind faith kind of way. We want to listen to the warning signs and respond to those from an adult, like a inner father and mother figure that are mature, responsible, looking out for our best interests. So positive inner parental figures, right?
Which sometimes you have to create because
you
often
always
didn't have, right?
Yes.
Right. So
that
sometimes
is such a huge part of the work.
that's a big piece of the work is to create those inner structures and what I might call container, so that you have a space to be able to transform some of these feelings and emotions or sensations that come up or whatever that might be. It's difficult when there's no container or you don't have a model for an inner adult mother, father.
Totally. The work of developing generative inner parental figures is not small. It's massive, right? And it usually takes the support of a therapist that I don't like. Most people don't have healthy enough parents to be able to parent themselves internally really effectively. The transition happens typically at midlife, whenever midlife is,
right?
It's a broad term. And we go through a big process of learning how to be effective, let's say, advocates for ourselves as adults, so that that inner child can be, terrified and paralyzed. But the effective inner parent can be like, okay, I got this. There's a problem with XYZ. I need to face that problem head on and address it. And then we can start to build trust, not only in ourselves, but in greater spirit, whatever that is for each individual person, right? That which is greater.
Yeah. So how does the wild woman archetype fit in here? I'm trying to sort of see where things are very kind of practical, or what we might call, is that logos, where we're,
Logos is more associated with like logic and masculine animus type energy, which also has to develop that inner masculine. Yeah. So wild woman, I would say, is, as I'm going to simplify this, and I actually might have flagged a quote. I flagged a few potentially interesting quotes, and one of them actually might be relevant there. So I might have a look at that.
Okay.
So wild woman is an awakening process that happens for women and for individuals that identify as women. So I would add trans women into that as well, as I've had a lot of positive feedback from trans women about this.
Okay.
So it happens for women in this midlife window, that they connect with that place that's authentic. It's instinctual. It knows, we as women, we know what we want, what we value, what our feelings are, what our needs are, what our priorities are. We might be scared to ask for our needs to be met. That's a really hard thing for women to learn, is to identify the needs and then ask for them, especially from an intimate partner or close friend or family
Family.
member. So as we reclaim our authenticity as the wild woman, we develop those skills to do that. In that process, we are developing strong inner advocate parents that will, okay, this is going to really suck. You can't figure this out in a silo. You have to go and ask for this need to be met because what's happening isn't working. Right. And it's like, it just sounds so simple. You just have to ask for your needs to be met. It is so hard. It's so vulnerable, you know?
Yes, because often those needs aren't necessarily well formulated. Like, we have to know what they are and be able to articulate that, and then to ask for it on top of that. It's just, yeah. And there are a
And
lot
ask
of
for it in a way that's not crazy awkward,
yeah.
you know?
Or yeah, that's going to have an opposite effect than what we
Yes.
want. Yeah, all of those kinds of things.
Totally. Often the fear is that this person's going to leave me, reject me, create a big conflict that might not feel emotionally or psychologically safe, because it might not be psychologically and emotionally safe. In which case, it's better to have a boundary than to put yourself in that vulnerable position, right? So if somebody has demonstrated in the past that they are not welcoming the change in you having needs, or not you specifically, but us as women.
People,
yes,
women.
I try not to use the pronoun you.
Yeah.
If the person is pushing back, then they like status quo, and that does not serve the woman's personal growth, right? Often power is in play there. So if somebody is enjoying power over, rather than, or projecting, if it's a romantic partner, potentially projecting their inner anima, their inner feminine figure onto the woman, right? And so sacrificing that is too big of a sacrifice. So then it becomes very difficult.
Right. Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about the animus, and how we work that out. And each of us have both. And so how we're working that out.
So a brief chronology is Carl Jung, 100 years ago, male Swiss psychiatrist, 120 even. He identified the anima as a man's projection of the female inner figure, inner soul figure specifically, onto a woman. So it's a representation of the man's soul. And anima is also tied to the word animate and animal. These are all part of the same word etymologically. So it means to like bring life to, right? In that context. So anima and soul are also almost interchangeable in our long growing list of almost interchangeable words.
Yeah.
And then we kind of roll along, and his wife, Emma Young, who was a very accomplished, brilliant woman, and a few other female Jungians over the years evolved that. And they said, well, women have a counterpart. We have the animus, which is the inner masculine, which represents our projection of spirit onto man. So there again, we have spirit, soul, slightly different. And then we evolve along to James Hillman, I think around the 70s. And he's the founder of archetypal psychology. And he said, you know, they're actually kind of two sides of the same coin. They're a syzygy, which is a really complicated word. So two sides of the same coin works well. And every person has both. Like they exist in all psyches. And so they mediate as guides between the conscious and the unconscious. So conscious being what we know, the conscious identity, the conscious personality, everything that we believe we know, that we hold consciously, and the unconscious, which is like the ocean, and it's everything we don't know, which is really vast, right? It's a lot. So the anima animus would move between the two. So they're often used in the same sentence, anima animus.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I got really frustrated with, not frustrated, I found the language was getting too constricting with the last book, which was Love and Soul Making, Searching the Depths of Romantic Love. And so I was like, how can we neutralize this anima animus thing and just give it one word? And so I started using the word animum, which is still Latin for soul, but now it's not gender specific, which for me, that just feels like it gives it more breathing room. It can just be. And that was important to me because my dreams often reflect that figure as a shapeshifter, or a figure that might be a man that gives birth to a child, or a woman who has a penis. Like I get these really like unified figures, like it's one figure that has really both sexes in it.
Mm-hmm.
I get them a lot in my dreams. So I was like, to honor that, I need a different word. So generally speaking, when we're talking about women, we would talk about the animus as the masculine and anima as the feminine. But there's a kind of current, with gender lines being so blurred externally, that's also happening internally. So there's another shift going on around the language around that.
Interesting. Yeah.
And so women, because we live in patriarchal culture, which is not the systems and structures are problematic. Men are not the problem.
Right.
And that's so important to always keep at the fore, because that very often gets mixed up. Men, here I am using men, will often project their inner feminine onto women, and probably vice versa, but I think to a lesser degree, sort of, but not exactly, because we'll often project the provider, protector archetype onto men. And so when we take those projections back, and projections are really something in us that we see in the other person. So when we own those as ourselves and develop those traits ourselves, we get to know the actual person we're engaging with, right?
Right. I just think that's so challenging to just really own that and be aware of that. I remember in my own, I mean, obviously we're in process. This is a journey, right?
Yes.
But I remember at some point in my kind of one of my big transformations, that I was, what was coming really quickly and almost like fast and furious, like right in my face, was as soon as I thought I knew something, the very opposite would be shown to me to be true and so it was just very unsettling. And at the same time, it was this idea that any place in me, what I'm seeing that I don't like in someone else, is just something in me. It wouldn't even be on my radar if it wasn't in me. And so I was really not having to, but I was looking at that kind of constantly, of where those projections were.
Yeah.
But also just kind of working with that. I've been working with that lately around, it's easy to turn on the news and see something I don't like, or somebody I'm like, oh, making some face, and then to stop and actually own that and say, what is it about that person that's making you sort of disgusted right now? What is it that you think that person is? Because it's really a projection. And then break that down to somebody who doesn't tell the truth, who's just there saying whatever, and then looking at those traits in myself. And it's just hard to swallow, frankly. And sometimes I'm like, well, isn't it just, does it all have to be this deep and this, mystical and mysterious? Can it just be, I mean, what if we're looking at things that we do like? Is that not a projection as well? I mean, of course.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. But you can also make yourself a little dizzy if you go around, owning all of these all day long. But I do think it's helpful when you're complaining quite a bit about your life to say, okay, so, and complaining about the people in it, and particularly a partner,
Yes,
There's
particularly a partner. Usually the ones closest to us
mhm.
carry the most possibility for transformation,
It's
right?
like
Because we
charged.
activate each other's complexes. Yeah. And it is work. That we would call it shadow work, right?
Mhm.
Of just and removing the projections. And it takes years. It's not a hey, we put in our 6 months of meditation and we're good to go. Where's the
Right.
pleasure? But it might go in bursts like that. Like maybe we have enough energy to do a little burst of work, and then maybe we have to go back to parenting the children and buying the groceries and doing the dishes. Like, finding rhythm for the personal growth is really part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have any other thoughts about finding the rhythm for personal growth in all of your work and in your writing? Is there anything else about
I
that?
I think in depth psychology, one of the very central premises of Jung's philosophy, which is
Mhm.
different than James Hillman, although I like it because I ended up living it, is at midlife. So this proverbial midlife, you know, it's got a good range of years there that could be, that we go through this process of what's called individuation, and how he defined it many ways. It was an evolving term, but this process of becoming indivisible, not necessarily individualistic, but indivisible
Indivisible.
and whole within ourselves. So we're solid, we're rooted, right?
Right.
And so part of that process is the going through those complexes that get activated and working through them. Now we can have very intense periods, depending what our vocational calling is, where we will have to do a lot of self-reflection and owning projections and turning inward and alone time and journaling and dream work and getting support with
Mhm.
therapists. And those periods, they're characterized by high intensity, and they can have a range of years. It's not going to be quick that will go through. Somebody that's going to work in healing professions,
Mhm.
helping others through that journey, it's going to be longer, maybe 10
Mhm.
years
Right.
is the
Yeah.
bad news,
Yeah.
but realistic news.
Mhm.
But it's not consistent. It's
Exactly.
waves, right?
Exactly.
It's waves,
Mhm.
and then it does, um I don't know, smooth out. Like I'm in another really big transition. And I like that you used another transition, like plural. Like we go through these regularly, not super regularly, but every 7-14 years, we go
Right.
through big transitions.
Yes.
Once we're through that really big midlife one, the midlife crisis, the midlife awakening, the
Mhm.
spiritual awakening, whatever we want to call that.
Mhm.
Once we go through that one and we know that, oh yeah, this is familiar terrain. I know I feel lost. It's a dark night of the soul. I don't know how to navigate this. I have to
Right.
use my intuition and my instincts, and then I feel my way forward, and then there will be
Mhm.
an end to it. Once you know what's happening, it's
Mhm.
so much easier to navigate, right?
For sure. Absolutely. As I think about the different times in my life where you just feel so lost, I can feel that way now. Where you're just the dark night of the soul, but also the hope. Like there's just because you have been through it. So you're right. And I think that's something important for younger people to
Yeah,
realize that this is, well, it's sort of like where we started, that there is hope for a new life, for harmony and pleasure at
yeah,
the end of it.
yes,
And I do think it's really important. I remember I kept thinking, I didn't know what I was meant to do. I was a professor at the time, but I knew that I had some calling and I knew I needed to be clean and clear all the time. So it was a lot of stripping of who
yeah,
I thought I was, what I thought I needed in my life, including, wine and
yeah,
people, places, things, foods, just a lot of stripping.
yeah, yeah,
And that was very unsettling at times, but also freeing at the same time.
yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, super interestingly, that was also my experience. I didn't use the word stripping. I used ascetic practices because I was practicing in Indigenous medicine. I had a teacher, and
Mhm.
for quite a few years, there was
Mhm.
no alcohol, drugs, salt, sugar, meat, like super, super clean to be super, super clear and sensitive, right?
Mhm.
And then there was an invitation through a dream,
Oh,
which is actually in this book, in the Wild Woman book,
oh,
to
nice.
come back down into life and back into heat and nourishment and food and sensuality. And um, then I
Yeah.
could ease wine back in if I chose to, and have a lot more flexibility with my diet if I chose to. Like, sensual pleasures then became a joy, and it wasn't having to be so clean and restricted and clear to let that authentic wild woman come forward and be
Emerge
born,
more.
emerge. Yeah,
Mhm.
stripping away who we thought we were supposed to be is really the fundamental task that has to happen. It's so hard and scary.
Right. Yeah, it is. But it's also, I feel like I signed up for it and then was like, wait, what did I sign up for? Like I knew I wanted this.
I want to
Um,
review that contract.
yeah, can we go back to this? Yeah. And I think that it's so hopeful to be able to reintroduce what is more authentic, right? What is more wild woman
Yeah.
esque, I guess. Yeah, that's nice.
Well, I think there's in my experience and with my clients, and I'm sure you see it as well, the the reward is so worth it, right? To live a life that feels true to who you are, who we are. I mean,
Absolutely.
that's just so worth it. To live a life that is prescribed in many ways can feel safer,
Yes.
but not for long, and then we have to
Mhm.
anesthetize with all of the various things: busyness, shopping, too much wine, alcohol,
Mhm.
drugs, whatever.
Mhm.
Pharmaceuticals are, a very big one that keep us from going through the process, right?
Yeah,
Pharmaceuticals can support the process, but not prevent it, right?
right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And when you realize that something is preventing some kind of shedding, I think that I could visualize where I was holding on, kind of
Mm-hmm.
clinging, and that was going to hurt. And at some
Yeah.
point you realize, okay, if I let go and surrender here, it's still going to be uncomfortable probably, but it's not going to hurt nearly as much if I'm
Yeah.
clinging. I remember I had a business years ago and I took, I decided I had a dream, super clear dream that it was time for it to go. It was just time for it to go. And I was sad about it, but so I took all that off of my email, my title, the name of the company, all off of, and then someone asked me to do a reference or something, and I put it all right back on just for that letter. And I thought, oh, Kelli, come on now, like it's comical at this point, but just where we cling, where we
Yeah.
hang on,
Yeah.
you're right, it's so unbelievably worth it to
Yeah.
surrender and to come to a place of real authenticity. But I also think that that is frightening because you don't know where it's ending or where will I actually at the end of this know who I am, and just not who I'm not. That's
Yeah.
mhm.
It is, and we don't know. And in tarot, it's like the
Mhm.
fool card, right? It's the leap of faith that it may work out, it may be great, and it may not, and not everything will. But nothing's going to happen if you don't fall off the cliff, right? And so
Mhm.
there just has to be a willingness to try, and
That's
from that there will be experiences, and
100%.
we'll learn from those.
Hmm. I think for me, I just had to say yes. And I did not have to know what I was saying yes to. I was saying yes to life, I guess, if you had to
Yes.
really describe it in some words, even though it's
Yeah.
not easy to do. It was just, I just said, I want to live a life
Yeah.
that is in alignment with my soul. I
Yeah.
want body, mind, soul. I want to feel in alignment there. And that's,
Yeah.
and then you just get taken
Yeah.
and
I think
experiences.
that's it. That's so beautiful. And that's where I ended with Wild Woman 2, is this section on opening to life, like such similar language through the journey, right? It's this yes to life, open to life. We're going to
Yeah.
make mistakes, we're going to fall down, but we're going to live. And we
Yes.
have such a short time here, and we don't know how long it is. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's amazing. Like, Earth is so beautiful, and relationships are so beautiful. And,
Mm-hmm.
you know, let's get
Yes.
out there and experience it and feel it. And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree with you. It's and when you're feeling really I think lost, I just to get back out into life. Whatever life
yeah,
is, whatever experiences are coming.
yeah,
And if you can get to a place of gratitude, kind of like what we were saying with
yeah,
anxiety, or if depression comes, just actually getting to a place of like, okay, I'm listening. I'm
yeah,
open to receiving this message. I
yeah,
know you're trying to tell me something. Let me be open to this. And also with life, I find literally go outside, find something that's beautiful to see, a
yeah,
flower, a bird,
yeah,
something can help me sort of
yeah.
pivot out of that place.
Those two things, for me as well, are the key. Gratitude
Yep.
being one thing, so what you can
Mhm.
sink into and feel grateful for, and
Mhm.
beauty. So
Beauty.
finding the beauty, and that includes the beauty of endings and death,
Yes.
right?
Hmm.
Psyche's fourth task, she has to succumb to the beauty of the underworld, the beauty of death. And it doesn't mean literally, but it means letting go and finding the beauty in those releasings and letting go, right?
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful. So I know we're time is ticking, and I wanted to just talk to you a little bit about the messages. So we get messages in the body. We talked a little bit about that. It could come as an anxious feeling, it could be depression, it could be different kinds of emotions. But what about other things like in um, dreams, or things that seem like coincidence, but they're not?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all of
Synchronicities.
those
Yeah.
ways, synchronicities, those are all ways that the soul would be communicating to us.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so the body, the affects, I love that poem by Rumi. I think it's by
Mm-hmm.
Rumi, The Guest House, about
Mm-hmm.
treat each visitor as a guest and welcome them in,
Mm-hmm.
whatever that mood may be, whether that's a depression, anxiety, fear, if we just be with that. So attuning to the body, welcome it, listening. Depression so often is and I don't really know why actually depression is so rejected in our society. If we think of it as a period of incubation to gestate the new life, or
Mm-hmm.
like winter where we like want to curl
Hibernate.
up
Mm-hmm.
inside and be like a bear, like I actually love that. It's a really generative time for me personally, but socially we're taught to be so frenetic and extroverted and
Mm-hmm.
but I find that quite draining. So that what can be quite
Mm-hmm.
depressive, if we just reframe it as um, inward gestation, and
Mm-hmm.
anxiety as our body's alerting us to something, and all of the other affects. What's happening today? Are we overwhelmed? Do we need boundaries? Anger is usually, not usually, but often about boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
So all of these different affects. Dreams, particularly if we can track a series of dreams or have a feeling that, oh, that was a big dream, then we can
Mm-hmm.
receive that information from the unconscious, from the psyche.
Mm-hmm.
Synchronicities. So Jung called those acausal. So there's no obvious cause for the experience to happen, the
Mm-hmm.
acausal. Those kinds of synchronicities are, I would say, the soul of the world, the anima mundi. communicating and connecting to us as one of her tendrils, you know.
Mm-hmm.
We're part of the soul of the world, the anima mundi. We're not separate from it, and yet we're also individual. Um, and then we would have nature is always such a clear mirror back to us.
Mm-hmm.
Prayer and meditation are absolutely reflections back. Journaling is one of my favorites. So that's, where we can hear that inner voice coming up from us just through journaling. And we can use dominant and non-dominant hand journaling to give voice to different perspectives that we'll hold within our psyche. And then the projection and complexes, my gosh, that's maybe even the biggest one in many ways, like where we're having conflict in
Mm-hmm.
our life and in our relationships. So
Yeah.
taking that back, looking at it, unpacking it. Is there a need here? What's happening? Why is
Mm-hmm.
this person not behaving the way I think they should be? Or
Mm-hmm.
why does he think I should be behaving this way? Because that's not authentic for me. He's probably not seeing me. I should explain to him who I am. All of that. That's all soul making. All of that has the potential to expand soul, to connect us to soul, uh, to hear those intuitive wisdoms. Oh, tarot was another one I mentioned with the
Oh,
Fool.
right.
Yeah, I'm
Mm-hmm.
using tarot a lot right now. It's hard to read our own tarot cards, but if you get a deck with a really well written, beautiful
Book.
book,
Uh-huh.
then you can receive the mirroring back through the text, right?
Right.
All these things are just reflections and mirrors of
Yeah.
ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's what I was saying earlier too. It's all a reflection. So
Yeah,
even the places where it's uncomfortable, if you can just take
yeah,
it in and see it as a reflection.
yeah.
Yeah. And as somebody going through a big transition and helping other people along this road, how do you nourish your soul? How do you nourish your body, mind, soul, I guess is a better way.
Like right during the peak of the transition, not well. I'm not gonna sugarcoat that. It's been really challenging to get enough sleep, to eat well, because there's like no food in the house because we're days away from leaving.
Mhm.
um so trying to like really hit the basics, get as
Uh-huh.
much rest at least as possible, enough water, writing down my dreams, journaling, setting really clear boundaries. There's lots of people I'd love to be spending time with right now. I can't, so I have to manage my limitations of my energy,
Mhm.
right? And that's hard. It's not easy to not have enough space to do everything, but that proverbial to-do list will never be done, so doing what we can.
Right. Right.
And just accepting that there will be short periods, not long. Like I know this period of high intensity is going to be about 2 weeks.
Mhm.
And then it's going to be new life and in
It's gonna,
California
yeah.
and palm trees and, fresh juice and all of the things will be back and back into those routines pretty quickly. Like those will be priorities. So there's, it's
Okay.
almost like fitness. People
Mhm.
can take 2 weeks off their fitness plan to go on vacation. It's
Mhm.
okay. They're not going to lose their fitness. People can take 2 weeks off their soul maintenance in
Yeah.
order to,
Get through
deal with some
something.
heavy life stuff. And then
Yeah.
it comes back, right?
Absolutely. And you're right. You just go to the basics or the things that are super important to you or the things that
Yeah.
are most life-giving so that
Yes.
you can sustain yourself for those few weeks or whatever that ends up looking
Yeah.
like. And I think that once you know what really works for you and you
Yeah.
know what's really important, like being in nature, or
Yeah.
I have certain things that rituals that are just they're
Yeah.
very important to me.
Ritual, gosh, yeah, that's a huge one. That was actually one I did yesterday as I had a bunch of tobacco and broke it
Uh-huh.
up and prayed with tobacco and had a big ritual of sprinkling and offering tobacco to the
Hmm.
spirits. So definitely ritual, whatever that is intuitively for each person, fitting
Hmm.
that in. And when we're in a transition, not to miss, we're in the transition for soul's purpose, right? So it's like a call, a destiny, or a fate. And so it will be not smooth necessarily, especially when we have how many planets going retrograde right now, including Mercury.
Right.
It won't be smooth. Astrology is another helpful tool in soul language.
Mhm.
Um, but it will be supported, and
Mhm.
I have absolute,
Yeah.
absolute trust and faith in that the direction will be guided. So even if I can't stay
Mhm.
as connected in all the ways I would normally,
Right.
I know that the connection is there anyway, and that is why I'm moving forward in the direction I am.
Yeah, I love that because I often say, if you just take a step, the path will rise to meet you.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
And it might be not exactly what you thought, or you might have to make some adjustment, but if you're just making a step,
Yeah.
the path
And
will rise.
often we can't see more than one at a time.
No,
And
right.
so we take the one step in front of us
Mhm.
and then we wait for the next one to present. And if it's only like kind of vaguely there, we like maybe put our toe out and test it out, see if it shows up and rises up to meet us. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I have loved talking to you. I'm so grateful that you took time in this huge transition to carve out a little time to talk to me because I am so grateful to learn more about you and about all that you do and also to have this great conversation.
Yeah, likewise, Kelly. Thank you. And it's this kind of thing, this kind of conversation does nourish my soul. So I'm really grateful to
Me
have
too.
this little pause as well. So thank you for this.
Yes. Well, I hope it all goes super smoothly for you over the
Thank
next
you.
couple of weeks and we'll just stay in touch.